October 1976, Yankee Stadium. The Cincinnati Reds were one victory away from sweeping the Yankees, and Gary Nolan had the ball. The renovated stadium was filled with pinstripes, autumn noise, and the pressure that came with trying to finish a World Series in New York. For Nolan, the stakes carried another layer. He had pitched in 3 previous World Series, but he had never been the winning pitcher in one of those games. That night, at last, Nolan got the victory. Cincinnati completed the sweep, and the 28-year-old right-hander finally had his World Series win. It looked like the summit of a career still moving forward. Instead, 1976 would be Nolan's final full season in the major leagues. The pitcher standing on baseball's largest stage that October had once arrived with the kind of fastball that made the future seem almost limitless. He had reached Cincinnati at 18, overpowered Willie Mays at 19, and helped the Reds win a pennant at 22. By the end of 1976, he belonged to a Cincinnati dynasty that had captured 4 National League pennants and 2 World Series championships. Yet only a year after the sweep, Nolan would throw his final major league pitch. He was 29. To understand how a career could rise that quickly, survive so much, and still end before most pitchers reach their 30th birthday, you have to go back to Northern California, and to a young man whose life was already moving at major league speed before he ever signed a professional contract.
Gary Lynn Nolan was born in Hurlong, California in 1948. His family moved to Oroville when he was young, and that became the place most closely tied to his story. In February 1965, Nolan married his high school sweetheart, Carol Widener. He was 17 years old. By the following year, he had graduated from Oroville High School, and the Cincinnati Reds had selected him in the first round of the 1966 amateur draft, 13th overall. For anyone who remembers following baseball in the mid-1960s, think back to how distant the major leagues could feel from a high school field. There was no constant stream of prospect video, no nightly package showing every teenager with a professional fastball. A young player could seem to emerge almost at once, his name suddenly appearing in the box scores alongside men who had already become part of the game's permanent landscape. Nolan made that distance disappear in less than a year. On April 15th, 1967, he took the mound for Cincinnati against the Houston Astros. He was 18 years and 323 days old, the youngest player in the National League that season. In his first major league inning, Nolan struck out the side. He worked into the 8th, allowed 3 earned runs, struck out 8, and earned the victory in Cincinnati's 7-3 win. There had been almost no transition between the life he knew in Oroville and the demands of facing major league hitters. One spring, he was a first-round draft pick out of high school.
The next spring, he was winning games for the Reds. The debut established that Nolan belonged. What happened less than 2 months later showed how extraordinary his ability might be. On June 7, the San Francisco Giants came to Crossley Field. Nolan had turned 19 only days earlier. Across from him was a lineup carrying 2 of the most feared names in baseball, Willie Mays and Willie McCovey. Crossley was still an old-fashioned major league park, squeezed into the Cincinnati neighborhood around it. Its double-decked grandstand sat close to the field, and the famous terrace rose in front of the left field wall. On a June night there, the crowd did not need a radar gun reading to understand a fastball. The sound of it reaching the catcher and the late swings it produced told the story. Nolan struck out Mays in their first meeting. Then he did it again. And again. And a 4th time. Willie Mays, already one of the greatest players the sport had ever seen, struck out 4 times against a pitcher barely removed from high school. Nolan recorded 15 strikeouts in all. For 7 innings, the teenager's power had controlled the game. But the Giants still had Willie McCovey. In the 8th, McCovey hit a 3-run home run that tied the score. Nolan was removed, and San Francisco eventually won 4-3. The box score held both sides of a pitcher's education. Nolan had produced a performance people would remember for decades, including 4 strikeouts of Willie Mays.
He had also watched one swing erase Cincinnati's lead and turn dominance into a loss. Mays offered a simple judgment afterward. The kid was good. Coming from Mays, there was no need to add anything. And if your earliest baseball memories come from that period, this may be the kind of game that first taught you how strange the sport could be. A teenager could defeat Willie Mays 4 times in one evening. He could strike out 15 major leaguers, and when it was over, his team could still be the one that lost. Nolan's full rookie season confirmed that the performance was no isolated flash. He went 14-8 with a 2.58 earned run average and 206 strikeouts. His ERA was 4th best in the National League, and so was his strikeout total. He also led the league in strikeouts per 9 innings. That last number captured what hitters were confronting. Nolan was not merely surviving every 5th day as a teenage starter. In an era filled with dominant pitching, no National League pitcher was striking out batters at a faster rate per 9 innings. He also threw 5 shutouts. By the end of the season, he had already produced 6 wins above replacement, placing him among the league leaders. He finished 3rd in the Rookie of the Year voting, behind Dick Hughes of the Cardinals and a young Mets right-hander named Tom Seaver. Seaver would go on to build one of the great pitching careers in baseball history. Nolan's own future seemed wide open. At 19, he had the fastball, the results, and the respect of Willie Mays. But the meaning of a young player's first season always depends on what comes next. The available record does not provide the same defining scenes from 1968 and 1969, and Nolan's road was not a straight march from rookie sensation to superstardom. By 1970, however, he had become exactly what Cincinnati needed, a frontline starter for a club ready to move from promise to October. Nolan made 37 starts that season. He went 18-7, struck out 181, and finished with a 3.26 ERA. The Reds won the National League pennant, their first since 1961, and Nolan entered the postseason as one of the pitchers who had helped carry them there. The opening game of the National League Championship Series took Cincinnati to Pittsburgh and Three Rivers Stadium, a new circular ballpark of concrete and artificial turf. The place had opened only that summer. October baseball arrived there with the hard green surface under the players, the broad decks surrounding the field, and the sound of a postseason crowd reverberating through the enclosed bowl. Nolan faced the Pirates in a game that refused to give either team room to breathe. One scoreless inning became 2, then 3. The afternoon moved deeper, and every base runner carried more weight because neither club had broken through. Nolan kept returning to the mound and putting up another 0. 6 innings, 7, 8, 9. Through 9 complete innings, Nolan had not allowed Pittsburgh a run. Yet the game itself remained scoreless and went to the 10th. He had done everything a starting pitcher could do, but Cincinnati still needed to find a way to turn his work into a victory. The Reds finally did. Nolan earned the win in a 10-inning Game 1, giving Cincinnati the opening advantage in the series. The 19-year-old, who had once overpowered Mays at Crossley Field, was now 22, holding a postseason opponent scoreless for 9 innings on the road. For Reds fans who lived through that October, the memory begins before the championships became routine, before the team had won 2 World Series, before its dynasty had acquired the full weight of history. There was a first pennant to secure.
and a young right-hander matching the moment inning after inning in Pittsburgh. Cincinnati advanced to the World Series against the Baltimore Orioles. Nolan started Game 1 and took the loss. The Reds went on to lose the series, and his first trip to baseball's final stage ended without the reward that had come in Pittsburgh. Still, by the end of 1970, the larger direction of Nolan's career appeared unmistakable. Before his 23rd birthday, he had completed a 206 strikeout rookie season, won 18 games for a pennant winner, and delivered 9 shutout innings in the National League Championship Series. Everything needed for a long and distinguished career seemed to be in place.
The next 2 seasons would show how quickly that assumption could change. Nolan was about to reach the best statistical season of his life and discover that his greatest obstacle was no longer standing in the batter's box. In 1971, Nolan went 12-15. It was the first losing season of his career, a sharp reversal for a pitcher who had just won 18 games and helped Cincinnati reach the World Series. The record alone does not explain why, but in 1972, as Nolan surged back toward the top of the league, the physical trouble that would reshape his career finally became impossible to miss. Through the first half of the season, he won 13 games. That was enough to earn selection to the National League All-Star team, a public confirmation that Nolan had re-established himself among the league's best pitchers. He never got to take part. Neck and shoulder pain forced Nolan to withdraw from the game. An honor that should have marked his arrival at the midpoint of a brilliant season instead became the first unmistakable warning that talent would not be the only force determining his future. Nolan went onto the disabled list and began rehabilitating the injuries. The source does not preserve his private response to that interruption. What remains is the sequence itself. 13 wins, an all-star selection, pain serious enough to keep him out, and a season suddenly suspended. Then he came back. By the end of 1972, Nolan's record stood at 15-5. His 1.99 earned run average was the best of his career, and the second lowest in the National League, behind only Steve Carlton. Nolan also led the league in winning percentage at .750. An ERA below 2 meant that over a full 9 innings, he allowed fewer than 2 earned runs on average. For a team trying to win another pennant, that offered a powerful kind of reassurance. Most nights Nolan took the mound. Cincinnati did not need much offense to have a chance. And yet the most important number in his season may have been the time he had already lost. Nolan's finest statistical year had arrived with pain in his neck and shoulder, an abandoned all-star appearance, and a stint on the disabled list. The achievement and the warning could no longer be separated. Cincinnati returned to the World Series in 1972, this time against the Oakland Athletics. Nolan started Game 1 and worked 6 innings, allowing 3 runs in a loss. He returned in Game 6, gave up 1 earned run, and was removed after 4 1/3 innings. Once again, the Reds had reached baseball's largest stage. Once again, Nolan left the series without an individual victory. Oakland won the championship, and Cincinnati went home 1 win short. But even that disappointment remained secondary to the question now gathering around Nolan's health. He had just completed a 15-5 season with a 1.99 ERA. At 24 years old, he should have been entering the most dependable years of his career.
Instead, the next 2 seasons would nearly disappear. Arm problems forced Nolan to miss most of 1973. In 1974, he did not pitch in the major leagues at all. There are seasons in a player's career that can be remembered through 1 game, 1 pitch, or 1 October moment. Nolan's 1974 season is remembered through absence. No starts, no innings, no line in the major league record beyond the blank space where the year should have been.
The Reds continued around him, building toward the team that would become known as the Big Red Machine. Nolan, meanwhile, lost almost 2 full seasons during the stretch when a pitcher with his early resume might have been expected to add hundreds of innings to his career. The source does not provide a detailed medical account of those years, nor a personal description of the rehabilitation. There is no need to manufacture one. The consequence is visible enough. A pitcher who had reached the majors at 18 and posted a 1.99 ERA at 24 was gone for most of one season and all of the next. By the spring of 1975, the central question surrounding Gary Nolan had changed. The baseball world already knew what he could be when healthy. Now he had to establish whether there was still a major league career waiting for him. His return answered that question quickly. Nolan went 15-9 in 1975 with a 3.16 ERA. After the injuries, after the missing season, he again gave Cincinnati the workload and results of a dependable starting pitcher.
The way those results appeared in the record also reveals something important about the second half of his career. As a rookie in 1967, Nolan had led the National League in strikeouts per 9 innings. The image from that season was the teenage power pitcher overwhelming Willie Mays 4 times in one game. In 1975, Nolan led the league in fewest walks allowed per 9 innings. He would do it again in 1976. The source does not establish that Nolan consciously rebuilt himself into a different kind of pitcher, or that the injuries directly caused a change in style, but the statistical contrast is clear. Early Gary Nolan stood out for how often he missed bats. The later version stood out for how rarely he gave away first base. In 1975, he averaged only 1.239 walks per 9 innings. A year later, that figure fell to 1.015. In practical terms, Nolan was allowing little more than 1 walk for every complete game's worth of innings. For hitters, there were few free opportunities. For the Reds, there was less traffic to manage and less margin surrendered. That precision became part of Nolan's value to a Cincinnati club now reaching its full power. The Reds returned to the World Series in 1975 against the Boston Red Sox. Nolan started twice, but pitched only 6 innings total across those appearances.
His comeback season had helped Cincinnati get there, though the series itself did not provide him with the defining individual performance that his 9 shutout innings in the 1970 playoffs once had. Cincinnati still emerged as champion. Nolan finally had a World Series ring, 8 years after his teenage debut and 5 years after his first pennant. His return was recognized beyond the standings. Nolan received the 1975 Hutch Award, presented annually to an active major leaguer who best exemplified the fighting spirit and competitive desire of Fred Hutchinson by persevering through adversity. For Nolan, the meaning was direct. He had missed most of 1973 and all of 1974 because of arm trouble. In his first full season back, he won 15 games for the World Series champions. That might have been enough to define a successful comeback. Nolan was not finished adding to it. In 1976, he duplicated his 15-9 record. He again led the National League in fewest walks per 9 innings, and he also led the league in strikeout-to-walk ratio. The teenage strikeout pitcher and the later control pitcher could be seen together in that number. Nolan still recorded strikeouts, but now with remarkably few walks around them. Cincinnati won another National League pennant and returned to the World Series, this time against the New York Yankees. The setting had changed since Nolan's first October appearance 6 years earlier. Yankee Stadium had reopened in 1976 after an extensive renovation.
Its broad white facade and towering upper deck still carried the weight of the Yankees' past,
but the building had been remade for a new baseball era. By the fourth game, Cincinnati had control of the series. The Reds had won the first three and needed one more victory to complete the sweep. Nolan started the clincher. Under the October lights in the Bronx, the sound came down from decks filled with fans who had waited more than a decade to see the Yankees back in a World Series. The pinstriped home uniforms, the monuments beyond the outfield fence, and the familiar stadium geometry all announced where the game was being played. But the team in command wore Cincinnati gray. Nolan took the mound with several strands of his career converging at once. He had lost Game 1 of the 1970 World Series. He had lost Game 1 against Oakland in 1972. His two starts against Boston in 1975 had lasted only 6 innings combined. Between those trips to October, neck, shoulder, and arm trouble had taken away nearly 2 seasons. Now he had the ball in a game that could finish a championship. The Reds completed the 4-game sweep, and Nolan was credited with the victory. His first World Series win came in the last game of the 1976 season, on the night Cincinnati secured its second consecutive championship. If you watched that series as a young fan, you may remember how enormous Yankee Stadium looked on television, especially with Cincinnati's lineup moving through it with such assurance. Nolan's part in that memory is quieter than some of the famous images attached to the Big Red Machine. Yet for him, the clinching game completed a journey that had begun before the Reds became a dynasty. He had been there for the pennant in 1970. He had endured the loss to Baltimore, the defeat against Oakland, the limited work against Boston, and the empty Major League season of 1974. In 1976, at 28 years old, he finally became the winning pitcher in a World Series game, and it was the game that ended the series. The accomplishment carried an added weight that no one watching could fully measure from the celebration alone. Nolan had just completed consecutive 15-win seasons for back-to-back champions. His command was the best in the league. He had reached the ending that once seemed to evade him. There would be no long stretch of healthy seasons after it. New arm and shoulder problems troubled Nolan in 1977. On June 15, Cincinnati traded him to the California Angels for minor leaguer Craig Hendrickson. The transaction ended Nolan's active connection to the only major league organization he had known. Cincinnati had drafted him out of Oroville High School in 1966. He had debuted for the Reds the following spring, pitched for 4 pennant winners, and taken part in both of the franchise's World Series championships during the decade. Now he crossed leagues and joined the Angels. His last major league appearance came on September 18, 1977, against the Chicago White Sox.
Nolan worked 3 1/3 innings, about 8 hits and 4 earned runs, and took the loss. He was 29 years old. The Angels released him in January 1978. Nolan signed with the Milwaukee Brewers the following month, but Milwaukee released him on March 1st. He never appeared in another major league game. The reason his career ended so early was not hidden in a single catastrophic moment. Physical trouble had been accumulating around it for years. Neck and shoulder pain had forced him out of the 1972 All-Star Game. Arm problems took most of 1973 and all of 1974. More arm and shoulder trouble arrived in 1977, just after his 2-season championship comeback. Those interruptions denied Nolan the longevity his teenage arrival had seemed to promise. Even so, the finished record contains far more than an unfinished projection. Across 10 major league seasons, Nolan went 110-70 with a 3.08 earned run average. He struck out 1,039 hitters, completed 45 games, and threw 14 shutouts. In 250 appearances, 247 of them starts, he worked 1,674 2/3 innings. His adjusted ERA was 1.17.
meaning his run prevention was 17% better than league average after accounting for the scoring environment. His .611 career winning percentage placed him comfortably above the break-even line. In the postseason, he went 2-2 with a 3.34 ERA across 11 appearances and 59 and a third innings.
Those totals do not resemble the full career once imagined for the teenager who struck out Willie Mays 4 times. They do describe an excellent pitcher whose prime was repeatedly broken apart. Nolan also handled his position with unusual precision. Over his career, he committed only 3 errors in 287 total fielding chances, producing a .990 fielding percentage. The same control visible in his later walk totals extended to the work around the mound. There is a temptation to measure a player like Nolan only against the highest possible outcome. He was a first-round pick who reached the majors at 18. He dominated immediately. His most similar careers by age include names associated with enormous early expectations. Against that imagined future, 110 victories can look like evidence of what was lost. But the career Nolan actually had deserves to stand on its own. He won 14 games with a 2.58 ERA as a teenager. He developed into an 18-game winner for a Pennant club. He pitched 9 scoreless innings in a postseason opener. He produced a 1.99 ERA in a season interrupted by neck and shoulder pain. Then, after arm trouble removed him from the majors for almost 2 years, he returned to win 30 games across 2 seasons for consecutive World Series champions. That is more than unrealized promise. It is a career divided into 2 acts, with a stretch of silence between them, and real achievement on both sides.
Cincinnati recognized Nolan's place in its history by inducting him into the Reds Hall of Fame in 1983. He did not need a long decline or a late career tour through multiple organizations to become part of the franchise's identity. His decade with the Reds had already contained the rise of the Big Red Machine, 4 pennants, 2 championships, and his own recovery from the brink of losing his career. After baseball, Nolan's life moved in a direction few fans watching him at Crosley Field could have predicted. He worked for 25 years in Las Vegas, first as a blackjack dealer at the Golden Nugget, and later as an executive host for hotel and casino guests, including at the Mirage and Gold Country. The major leagues had carried him from Oroville to Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Oakland, Boston, and New York. His working life after baseball took him into the casinos of Las Vegas. Eventually, the story circled back to where it had begun. In 1999, a baseball park in Oroville was renamed the Gary Nolan Sports Complex. Nolan moved back to Oroville in 2003. There, he became involved with charitable and civic organizations and worked with high school pitchers. In 2011, he was inducted into the Oroville Union High School District Hall of Fame. That is the proper final image for Gary Nolan's career. A pitcher drafted out of Oroville High School reached the majors at 18.
Before he was 20, he had struck out Willie Mays 4 times in 1 game and led the National League in strikeouts per 9 innings. Before he was 25, he had won a pennant, pitched 9 scoreless postseason innings, and recorded a 1.99 ERA. Then his body narrowed the future. Pain interrupted his best season. Arm trouble erased nearly 2 more, and renewed problems ended his major league career at 29. Yet Nolan made it back, long enough to become something beyond the teenage sensation people first expected. He returned as one of the National League's hardest pitchers to walk against. He won 15 games in consecutive seasons. He earned the Hutch Award for persevering through adversity. And in the final game of the 1976 World Series, he earned the victory that completed Cincinnati's sweep. Gary Nolan's career was shortened, but it was not left without an ending. Decades later, back in Oroville,
He worked with pitchers near the same age he had been when Cincinnati first called his name. The long career once projected for him never arrived. What remained was a different kind of completeness, a hometown field bearing his name, a place in the Reds Hall of Fame, 2 championship rings, and one October night at Yankee Stadium, when the pitcher who had already come back from disappearing finally stood on the winning side of the World Series.